Have you ever made a decision in your life? I'm sure you'd like to think so, but others would disagree. Did you pick the Christmas presents that you unwrapped? Did you choose your dog's name? Did you decide what to have for dinner? Or was this all laid out before you even came into existence? These sorts of questions have been asked for centuries, and probably as long as man had the ability to ask questions, probably forever. It falls under the free will and versus determinism argument. Are we free thinking agents that can create our thoughts, form our decisions, and act in the world? Do we have free will? Are we free to act according to our will? Or are our acts and our decisions and our life determined for us by our genes, by our environment, etc.? On the surface, it looks pretty straightforward and easy and answerable. The free will proponents would say, of course, we have free will. Look, I can think of a thought, I can explain the choices, and I can make a decision according to that. I can do that right now. I can decide to stop talking now, and I can decide to continue talking. Case closed, clear cut. We have free will. However, the determinist side of the argument would say that because of one's genetic makeup, the heritage they've got from their parents and their ancestors, and the environment in which they grew up in, these dictate what you're always going, how you're going to respond to given situations, and ultimately the choices that you're going to make. So which is it? And does it matter really? Now, it's easy to see why some people would gravitate towards either end of this argument. For example, if there is such thing as free will, then your life is filled with choice. At any given moment you can change the direction of your life for the better or for the worse. However, with free will comes the responsibility and the accountability of your actions. So yes, you would be free to do things and act according to your own desires and will, but also there's a containment involved there in terms of being held accountable and responsible for your actions. So on the other side then, in the determinist view, if we do wholeheartedly believe that it's not down to people's desire or their individual choice why bad things happen in the world, then we can do away with the term of evil. It's not a given person's evilness, I suppose, or bad intentions that end up with wrongdoing in the world. It's down to their social conditions, to their genetics even, I suppose, that have resulted in them inevitably acting in a way that can be deemed to be wrong according to societal standards. So if we want to get rid of bad in the world, then all we have to do is create a society that is largely beneficial for and encouraging to the betterment of people and the greater striving towards a more moral purity. Parallel to the benefits of each of these views, there are also some pitfalls, I suppose. In the first instance, with free will, if people are to confuse having the freedom to make their own decisions with having the freedom or the right to do whatever I want to do, then those are two very different things, and they can be dangerously substituted one for the other if they're not kind of understood properly. And also with the determinists, if you take the view that there's no evil in the world, or there's no bad people, there's just people that do bad things as a result of their social conditioning or their family history or their family genetics, then you also de facto have to offer up a lot of power to people to control that society in a way that they would deem would elevate people up to a standard that they perceive to be good. And of course, the question is then, are these people deciding and using their free will to create such a society, or are they just viewing society as an inevitability where government becomes so strong and so large that everyone's given situation and circumstance and surroundings need to be contained and need to be validated and need to be approved of by a moral state it fundamentally boils down to, I suppose, an existentialist approach to psychology versus a behaviorist approach, or even a kind of a psychodynamic approach versus a behaviorist approach. You know, the behaviorists just see people as just being products of their conditioning. Therefore, if you give the right conditioning, then people will be good or people will be okay. With the danger being who gets to decide which conditioning and to what end. I'll put the links to some experiments that kind of serve to add some weight to either end of this argument, particularly the deterministic view. I will put, which ultimately boils down to it being a reductionistic approach to the person or the self or your actions, which means like you are the result of your brain activity, or even you are just your brain activity. So in these experiments they found that a person's choice was kind of, or brain activity was activated before the person was consciously aware of themselves making the choice to pick A or B, for example. So because the decision seemed to have been made prior to the person being consciously aware of making that decision, they see this as a massive blow to the idea of having free will. You know, that you're consciously aware of the decision that you're making. However, they are categorizing the person or the self or someone's intention in a very kind of thin strip there by kind of lumping it under the heading of needing to be conscious for it to express free will. Whereas there's so many things that we do that are out of our conscious awareness, but they're still fundamentally human. They're still fundamentally us, you know. Like when you're eating, you're not really consciously aware of your hands and the distance between the plate and your mouth exactly. But could you still look at that person then and say they're not eating, you know, or they're not deciding to eat? And ultimately, I'm not going to argue too heavily either side of the argument. I'm not going to try and prove the argument here. You know, if you're interested, you can go off and read about it yourself. Or just go along with what you're thinking now, you know, but at least ask the question of what is the proof, or what is the evidence for the other side of the argument. You know, it's always best to have whatever belief you want, as long as you can argue vehemently against that belief, you know, in an honest manner. You know your own dark side, know the counter argument to what you're holding valuable or what you're holding true, you know. I will say one thing though, is that there's massive money to be made off society believing in the strictly deterministic view. For example, in terms of mental illness and mental disorders, you know, depression, anxiety, all of those kind of things. There's massive money and control involved in people adhering to that view. You know, it's not a matter of anything I've done consciously to become depressed. It's just these things happen, you know. You just one day have depression, or given your circumstances in life, it's natural that you became depressed, and you would probably, because of your genes, end up either perpetually in a depression or continuously over life battling with bouts of depression. You know, what the deterministic view takes away is your ability, in principle, even to get yourself out of these holes, or to understand that maybe you got yourself into these holes, you know. So both sides are interesting, and I'm not going to come in here and say because I don't fall on either side of it, I'm going to throw both of them out. I do believe that there's influence from your parents, from their parents' parents, their parents' as far back as you want to go. But that kind of begs the question of, like, how far back do you go? You know, when does the influence on you stop, or when does it start? You know, there's evidence with epigenetics that it could just continuously go back forever, with grandparents' decisions impacting on their grandchildren. You know, so you can scale that right back to great grandparents or whatever. You know, so, and also you can't isolate each case. So there's probably no ability to go 500 years and say, this is when the influence started that will impact on you and your interests and your life today, you know. So I think you can spend your life chasing that and never really get there. And also on the determinist side, I think there are effects that kind of impact and limit what you can do in the world. You know, you might be born with one leg that's shorter than the other, which could limit your ability to perform in athletics or any kind of sporting endeavor. You know, you might be born deaf, you know, which could cause you to struggle in terms of education or music or reading, even if you're born blind, you know. So there are limits. So depending on how you're born physically, there are determinants um, in what you can do in your life. And again, in terms of genetics and stuff, they always talk of it's a kind of no lose situation, really, because when you're arguing for genetics, if just say the blue gene that they say is a gene that kind of predisposes people to being depressed, if the person gets depression, then you can say, oh, well, look, it was the genetics. But if they don't ever get depression, you can say, well, they're always predisposed to getting depression anyway, so it might just be a matter of time, you know, or given the right conditions, that person might become depressed. So it's kind of unfalsifiable to a degree. So again, I think they're both interesting. Go down all roads, read what you can, but I'm not here to give the final say on anything. What I am here to offer is maybe a third view, you know, or an additional view even. A kind of melding together of both, you know, of free will and determinism. And my argument would be that not that I suppose you're limited in the world in that the interests you have in life, you know, whether you're into music, whether you're into fashion, making shoes, making furniture, you know, walking dogs, climbing trees, whatever it is, playing guitar, you know, making candles, whatever the case may be. I believe, or it's an interesting way of looking at it, even to me anyway, that you bring these into the world. You know, it's like it's not a guarantee that you're always going to follow your father's footsteps or your mother's footsteps. You know, so if they were solely genetic, then interests would be a given, you know. But I believe that you bring these in, not as a result of your social conditioning or because of your environmental factors, or even because of how you were in the womb with your mother, which is, again, a massive field that the determinists kind of tend not to look at, from what I've seen anyway. You know, they kind of tend to see the environment as starting after birth, which it doesn't. As soon nearly at conception, it could be argued that it begins, the influences begin. But either way, I believe that the innate interests you bring into the world, they're yours, you know, and you didn't consciously decide to have them, you know. It's not like so much you can wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be into cricket now, you know, and that's going to be my passion, that's going to be my favorite thing to do and watch and play, you know, and I'm just going to go after that. More than likely, if you don't have a natural desire to play or be interested in cricket, regardless of how much you force yourself to pursue that, you'll just lose interest, you know. It'll bother you, it'll bore you, and ultimately your attention will kind of wane and you might get frustrated with it, so you'll go on to something else, and that something else might be more in line with what you're naturally interested in. And you can try this for yourself, you know. Pick something that doesn't seem initially to grab your attention and just say, I'm going to follow that and I'm going to pursue that and be really into that and get great at it, you know, and see how that works out for you. So yeah, you can obviously, in terms of the free will, you can decide to go after this or not. In terms of the deterministic view, these personal, soulful even, and I will put in the word soul because I think it's an apt word to describe the totality of someone plus a little bit more that we're not even aware of, you know. I think that we bring in these soulful endeavors into the world, not by choice, they're just part of us, you know, and they point our interests in certain directions, you know. Like not everyone is going to be interested or have their interest piqued by the same thing. They just naturally don't. So I think the deterministic view, it could be argued that these are the bounds that limit you in the world, you know. Your interest is given to a certain set of things, you know, and the free will then is you can decide to pursue them, or you can decide to not pursue them, you know. But again, you will suffer accordingly or you will benefit accordingly. And I think it opens up the door towards the mental health and depression and anxiety and suicide and stuff I spoke of earlier, in terms of not following or not pursuing your natural interests, regardless of what the reasons why. You might be afraid you'll fail, you might be afraid you'll get really good at it. So regardless of what these tastes or what these preferences are, the ability to decide, I'm going to give this a shot. It's there. Think about it yourself. Do you know that voice that goes on? It's like, will I call in there and ask them about that, or will I not? We go through it 50,000 times probably a day. These options that we have. Will I, won't I? Will I, won't I? Will I cross the road at this time or that time? And we kind of take it for granted, that we have this inner dialogue going along. But what if there is these natural interests and you're not really aware of them, because you might ignore them. Your attention is it's not given the fruit that it deserves. You're not pointing it, and you're not allowing it to wander where it naturally wants to wander. And if you are, then you kind of go, well, I don't want to do that, I'll do something else. What if they are, or that is the purpose of being here, is to just absolutely follow these directions that come from you, And what if all these mental struggles or emotional struggles that people suffer from, what if they are the result of ignoring these natural yearnings for just too long, And this might sound to some of you like I'm talking about there being like two different parts of you. And I am, to a degree. I think they are you, but you can see them as two different parts. One is your kind of conscious awareness and what you can kind of recall in the moment or hold in your attention in any given moment. But there's also a more kind of fundamental side of you, your physiological sensations, your history, your emotions, your belief systems, your biases, your preferences. And this has been documented by the works of Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga, and I'll stick a book or a link in this as well. And it's an interesting topic, and it's an interesting question to ask yourself. Have you ever made a choice in your life? And are you ignoring choices that kind of rise up from your belly and go, I won't mind doing that? And if you are, then give one of them a go. See how you feel.